If your individual situation says, I should go to Europe, then that's what it is. But if you're assuming that by going to Europe or any other Western state, you will escape fascism, you're not understanding the reality. Okay, so I made a video about Europe, and a lot of the comments were beautiful and honest depictions from people of all different backgrounds about what it's like living in Europe. But I also got a bunch of trolls. Let me actually show you what these trolls looked like, because I made a community post about it. But these trolls are also not exactly the trolliest trolls. They're pretty sincere. This is just a handful of them, right? There were so many more. Some of the comments I got: racism isn't a problem, Islam and Africans are. You know, some of these words I'm not even going to be able to say out loud. This one's really, really telling. Europeans have an anti-white and a white guilt problem that's being used to replace them. Your critique on how capitalism is racist is laughable. Neoliberal capitalism needs third world migration whilst having an excuse to not hire the European natives and also lower their social welfare. This is a flag early on. If you are a left-leaning person, keep this stuff in mind, because this will be absolutely a relevant political position of the future. This type of combining of an anti-capitalist critique with a white supremacist anti-immigration ideology, it was basically the basis of something like the Nazi regime, and it will be relevant. It will be relevant. And then you had stuff like this. So a lot of the Europeans were a little bit mad that I called out Europe for its racism, and a bit confused even about why I would do such a thing. Even now with the title of this video, some of the folks in the chat were a bit confused. Isn't obviously Europe better than America? We're gonna get into what that actually means today. We're gonna have a real conversation about what immigration actually consists of, because in a moment where it's quite obvious the United States of America is continuing to collapse in many senses, socially, economically, politically, and in a moment where thus a lot of Americans are thinking, maybe I should get out of here because it seems like things are getting worse and worse, that conversation needs to be had with integrity, with dignity, and with actual education. And what's happening is a lot of folks are talking about migration without actually understanding what migration is like, without actually understanding the reality undergirding migration that goes beyond just video game lists of attributes of different characters, but instead of characters, it's countries. It goes beyond saying, well, Sweden's healthcare system is, well, Germany's education system is, and it goes to actually thinking about what it's like to live in a different country, especially when you are different from the people of that country and the people of that country know about it. And especially when said people of that country have an unaddressed racism issue tied in with xenophobia and all manner of classism that will only continue to rise as climate crises accelerate. But first, we're going to talk about the phenomenon itself. We're going to talk about how Americans are talking about Europe. So this TikTok says, me when I see Europeans getting to live in beautiful cities, have reliable public transportation, universal healthcare, 10 weeks off a year minimum, oops, it stopped, reasonable cost of living, good quality food, and I'm sitting here in the US. And behind this text is what I presume is a white guy, sort of hands in face, crying, moving around on the couch. And this was from a few months ago. And this is a rhetoric that I have seen sort of repeated a lot, a conversation that I see brought up a lot, especially in the wake of the presidential election. Again, understandably and justifiably so, a lot of Americans look to Europe. Oftentimes when I talk about social issues and political issues in the US, I can mention like, hey, our healthcare situation pales in comparison to the programs that have existed in Europe for a long time. And so it's easy to fall into a way of thinking that, well, living in Europe must be a lot better than living in the United States. And in fact, you can make the argument that in a lot of ways it might be. So for instance, you have this example also of someone who is a white American, it seems, and talked about, well, Trump is taking office next week. This was in January. So I moved my family to Poland to keep our rights. This probably is a Polish person, maybe a person of Polish descent. And look at the great qualities that exist in Poland, right? Safest country in the world, while the US is ranked 108th. I don't know what the metrics are to measure that Poland is the safest country in the world. But this person says she walks around at night without a care. Back home, that would never happen. Which... You know, sometimes people talk about the US and having lived in the US for a long time, and I'm just amazed at how different experiences are in the US, because I know plenty of women who in New York City move around at night. Obviously, they have to walk around with a level of awareness and carefulness. But the idea that you can just eschew that when you live in Europe, especially if you're a woman of color, that confounds me a little bit. But it goes on to talk about, yeah, the healthcare is free in Poland. The cost of living is way better in Poland. The food is so fresh, it feels suspicious. You have to try pierogies. Never had a pierogi in my life living in the United States. Never seen anybody bring a pierogi to a birthday party. Never been around Polish restaurants in the United States, right? And of course, you have some choice comments. You have some annoying MAGA trolling. But it was also met with comments about, hey, isn't Poland, having one of the biggest far-right movements in Europe? Aren't they super conservative? They built a wall on their border. Love the cost of living part. Super cheap if you get money in dollars. If you get those in PLN, you are paying around half your earnings for houses. That's the reality of your cost of living that you're enjoying in a different country. I live in Poland. Average time to see a doctor is over a year now, so people go private anyways if they can afford it. Wow, it's almost as if capitalism. Strongest immigration policy. No wonder it's so safe. So a lot of the right wing reacts to this in various ways, and some of it being that, yeah, that anti-immigration, that hating of black and brown people that's popular politically, that's why this stuff is happening. Look, here's where we should start, right? Well, not start, but aside from what Bia just said, which is that the problem is that these videos sell you the travel blog version of a country, not the one you're going to live in. Great point. Moving is always a matter of personal considerations, your personal experience, your personal resources, your family's resources, etc., before anything else. When you decide to move to a place, it doesn't matter what features you see about that place on a travel log, on a news website, or on a list of comparing different healthcare systems. Your lived reality in a different city, never mind a different country, is based on who you are and what your situation is. So for example, if you get a student visa to study in a university in Western Europe, yeah, it's a good study situation. Like, that would make sense for you to do that. Regardless of political situations, there's a legal protection there. There's an academic and economic opportunity there. You take where your economic opportunities are. This is something that immigrant families like mine have understood for a very, very long time. But perhaps folks who are used to the comforts of living in the United States and have never had to consider migration before don't understand that. They think that you're picking and choosing video game characters, picking and choosing locations on a map based off of you can see it in internet culture, right? The way that maps pull up and it's like comparing and contrasting, better or worse, right? These things can mislead you if you're not used to thinking about how lived reality actually is when it comes to this stuff. They can deceive you into thinking that that's how you can actually live. It's just by choosing, I like this country. It looks like it has the 14th best healthcare system, but it has the 10th best public transit. I will go there. No, in fact, there are things like racism. There are things like systemic inequality. There are things like corruption that will very much affect you, especially depending on your status in that country. Europe is a continent, that'll depend on the country. Yeah, exactly. Although there is something to be said about, for instance, there has been a trend recently of Europeans, some of them in my comment section recently, talking about Europe is not a country, because they see Americans saying Europe this, Europe that. The reality is that yes, there are differences between countries, of course. Europe is also about the same square footage as the United States, the entire continent of Europe. We can also talk about why Europe and Asia are somehow not considered the same continent and what might be the implications there. We can also talk about the fact that there exists something called the European Union, which is an economic bloc, let's say, an economic organization of, almost all of the states of Europe. Not all of them. There are many ones that are excluded. One of them notoriously decided to leave a few years ago. And so, for instance, if you have a European passport, an EU passport in an EU country, you can travel between them, right? You can go live there. So again, if you have an EU passport, moving to Italy or moving to Germany, it seems like a better option. But many of us won't have those, okay? Many of us won't have those. Does Elliot live in America? Yes, I live in the US. So what's interesting about this, right, is that I also saw this post recently on Reddit from a subreddit called AmorExit. A lot of these kinds of Americans, right? And their discussions of sick of living in the United States, leaving America for a better life, right? And this person has to break down to you, look, Europe is very diverse in culture, bureaucracy, efficiency, job markets, cost of living, English fluency, and more. And you have to start with your situation. So Are you a remote worker? Are you getting a remote worker visa? There are passive income visas in certain countries. There are entrepreneurs and sole proprietor visas, student visas, startup entrepreneur visas, investor visas, researcher visas, right? And then you can get, in certain countries, a passport based on your ancestry. So for instance, more than 3 generations ago, if you have an unbroken chain of German ancestry, you can get a German passport. I think Jimmy Kimmel recently got an Italian passport. And there are visa requirements. There's got to be proof of income or savings, private health insurance. Sometimes it's a visa requirement, which is wild, right? You're going to move to Europe because they've got health insurance. They got universal health care over there. And then you come to find out that the visa requires that you have private health insurance. Clean criminal record. Anybody who got caught up in anything will have a hard time getting a visa. And then you also have to think about the taxes that you're still going to pay in the US when you have a visa. If you're living abroad, you still have to file US taxes. You have to also understand that like there might be tax benefits for you in certain countries or there might not be. There's actually some really good TikToks kind of breaking down some of the stuff that you're going to have to deal with if you move. But something I want to just read, an interaction on this thread that I want to read and kind of file away for later in this talk. The golden visa program in Spain ended in April, says this one Redditor. Someone responds, oh no. And then this person responds, actually, respectfully for Spaniards, this is an oh finally, yes. Because a lot of you also think you're going to move abroad and everybody's going to want you there because you're an American and you got money. And like Possible Bat just says, right? Passive income visas. Passive income in these countries means living off the US dollar and gentrifying and making life unaffordable for locals. So that lower cost of living you're bragging about, you know, you might as well be bragging about, oh, the lower cost of living that I'll have if I move to the Philippines, the lower cost of living I'll have if I move to Puerto Rico. Well, who does that lower cost of living affect? Especially when you're not being judicious about your choices and how you integrate into a country. So you have to make a lot of considerations. What kind of access can I get in that country? And by the way, again, those social programs that you're talking about being so much better in Europe, they're not necessarily going to apply to you if you don't have the right kind of visa. You know, you might be a refugee in Ireland. You're not going to get the same amount of benefits that a different type of immigrant might have, let alone a citizen. Don't tell the Ireland is full of people that. But yeah, it turns out that when you're an immigrant in a country, you don't get certain benefits. We're having that conversation in the US right now because a lot of people get away with saying things like, oh, the illegal immigrants, they're taking all the public housing. The illegal immigrants, they're getting Medicaid and they're stealing Medicaid. The illegal immigrants are voting for, and it's like, who is doing that? Illegal immigrants legally cannot do that. And if you think illegal immigrants are just going to la-di-da-di-da try to figure out a way to get something that's clearly illegal and will resort in them being deported, then you don't know any illegal immigrants, which is not shocking. Regardless, I want to show a couple of different TikToks. I will try not to play them at too much length because I don't want to have this end up being a total react stream. Not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily. It depends on how you do it. But because I also want to continue to stay on topic and on my talk. But there's one content creator on TikTok, for instance, who in November said basically that they're gatekeeping how to move to Europe content.
The countries that are the most attractive to move to are the ones that have the strictest immigration policies and are the least welcoming to outsiders. And the countries that are the easiest to move to are usually countries with struggling economies that you are going to make worse for the locals when you colonize your way in there and start gentrifying the place up. I often mention how I've lived in Europe 3 times, so when people come into my comments, they're usually asking about European countries. Specifically these like northern utopia countries like Sweden, where they have free healthcare and free education and everybody recycles and cares about each other. Do you think that these countries are homogeneously blonde because they have relaxed immigration policies? Even when you use our own country as an example, the United States, we have been watching people struggle with the H-1B process our entire lives. These are doctors, scientists, people who have studied at elite American universities that are pressed about their visa status every single day that they're in this country, assuming that they get to stay and they're not having to be sent back. Girl, you are a social media manager from Akron, Ohio, and you think you're gonna move to Ireland with no marketable skills, no European spouse, and an Irish company is going to pay all this extra money and do this extra work to sponsor your visa, to hire you instead of a local social media manager, and the country of Ireland is just gonna let you live and work in the company and take advantage of their social services and their free education and healthcare. Why? Because you asked nicely? You're gonna fill out an online application and then go pick up your work visa at the DMV? Is that how you think this works? Another creator on here put it very succinctly when she said that like the red tape and the bureaucracy of actually making a move like this happen is not easy even for the exceptionally qualified. And then to actually have to live that life far away from your place of birth is not for the weak.
Right. So this is a good sense of what that conversation is often missing. You are not just going to get the benefits that you keep marveling at Europe having by migrating there. And you end up in two categories, right? Because maybe you're a working class person and you're like, yeah, maybe I should move to Europe instead of the US because it's getting worse. Which, in your case, a lot of the times it's going to be laughable, frankly. I don't want to say it, but a lot of the times that's going to be laughable because you are not the kind of worker that these countries will just want to open up and give their social services to. And then there's people with money. And again, these are also relational things because, you know, a working class person in the US could be a person with money in a poor country. I will use quotation marks when I say poor country. But then there's a lot of people in the US who make a good amount of money, maybe 100K, maybe 150K, 200K a year. And they're like, oh, I've got to leave America to escape fascism. And you're going to go then to these European countries with all this money. And maybe you're going to get a visa, like a passive income visa or one of these nice cushy visas that takes advantage of your particular class status. Or maybe it's quite easy to find a job there. Well, in that case, a lot of the times you are going to be then taking advantage of the locals. Sometimes that might not even be a fair assessment, but sometimes it is. Regardless, you will face that assessment. You will face that stigma. And especially if you haven't done the work to research these cultures, if it's a different language, the language, to understand the makeup of the country, to understand getting around in the country, it's going to be really difficult for you. It's going to be really difficult for you. And that's all without having addressed yet the stuff that I actually address on this channel, which is fascism itself. You think you're going to escape fascism by going to Europe, where fascist movements are also growing in popularity? Same thing in Australia. In Canada, they had to wait until Trump started waging war with Canada before they were like, you know what, let's elect the centrist, center-right candidate instead of a far-right candidate. That was how close that they came, because the far-right in Canada was aligned with Trump. Regardless, these anti-immigrant sentiments are going to affect you. Okay, it's not just this America so bad thing. This is what I need people to understand, Americans and Europeans, because some Europeans are going to be hurt by seeing Americans insinuate that there are issues with their countries, that there are inequalities with their countries, which we'll get into that a little bit more. But some Americans also have to simply wake up to the reality that this anti-immigrant sentiment and this fascist sentiment that's happening in the United States, that's happening everywhere. It's happening everywhere. And both of these parties are guilty of assuming that fascism and ignorance and racism and capitalism are American things. They are not American things. They are not American things. Let me read the chat really quickly. Someone named says, I dislike how condescending and arrogant that woman came off. I don't understand. She's breaking something down to you. I'm just going to pretend like I don't notice the microaggression. She's literally just explaining that a lot of you have been miseducated and are acting arrogantly about simply moving to Europe, simply moving to these countries as if it's like a permanent vacation. So any conversation about moving, unless you are in a situation where like you literally are like getting persecuted, your group is getting persecuted to such a degree that you've got to escape, which we're seeing a lot of like Mexican folks, a lot of black folks, a lot of Hispanic folks of different backgrounds, and a lot of trans folks, right, having to consider in the United States right now. Unless you are in that position, there's not really a situation where you should be trying to make yourself even more desperate to escape a fascism that you're not actually going to escape. It's just facetious. And what it tells us is that you're actually just interested in surrounding yourself with comforts and avoiding struggle because you see yourself as above struggle. You see yourself as above living the kind of life that black people have to live in America, the kind of life that Mexicans have to live in America. You see yourself as above the idea that you might have to go out in the street and help people out instead of being able to stay in your house, avoiding everybody else like PewDiePie in Japan. That's not the lived reality for 99% of people. And frankly, you will benefit from understanding that the world is messed up no matter where you go, and you've got to stand and fight for what you have and build resources wherever you are and build community wherever you are if you're going to withstand it. That's the lesson that Black and brown people have been trying to impart upon people through their praxis and outside of it for a very long time, and some folks just don't want to hear it. We had the same conversation about TikTok. Because, yes, TikTok has just introduced these new draconian rules in their community guidelines. Once again, social media networks are becoming increasingly draconian. And what do people say? Well, how do we adapt to this? What can we do about this? What people are saying is, we should go to Blue Sky. We should go to Searchlight or wherever the fuck the Mark Cuban social media company is. We should find a social media company run by a normal person. Oh, if only. Because they don't realize that people have been struggling to put out praxis on social media platforms for a long time. People have been dealing with censorship for a long time. People have been dealing with bigotry for a long time. I'm getting quite heated, just like the apparently quote-unquote arrogant person that this person had an issue with. Because what bothers me is the fact that people think that they can just escape. The leopards won't eat your face because you ran too fast. Some people think that they'll appease the leopards, okay? Those people are very obviously flawed in their thinking. A Latino who votes for Trump is not doing a great job of preserving himself against the leopard, right? But some people think that they can run away from the leopard. Well, if I run, or if I get my car and I run away from the leopard, if I drive away from the leopard, the leopard will just leave me alone. There's leopards everywhere. Does this metaphor get a little too metaphorical? Am I getting a little carried away? Yeah, I'll take my business elsewhere mentality. Great point, Sarah. This is another one that I think is a pretty useful TikTok. Nelly, my partner, showed me this.
I'm a 37-year-old woman who makes six figures, has made 6 figures for a long time, works for myself, and have been country hopping for the last couple of years. I'm in the United States right now, visiting family. And I have noticed that there is a proliferation of videos of people telling you, like, if you're going to move now, get out of the country now. Basically urging you, trying to ring the alarm about the state of this country and telling you that you need to get out of the country. And I feel like I have the authority to speak on this because I live outside of the country most of the year. And on paper, I'm the ideal candidate to be a digital nomad / expat. And I'm here to tell you, some of you are not using your brains when you're having these conversations, and here's why. One question that comes up a lot in these discussions is, what do you do for money? What do you do for money? You're like, yeah, I work for myself. I can work from anywhere. And people inadvertently say one of a few handful of things, right? One is you get a remote job, or you are like me, you become an entrepreneur, or you live on investments or retirement, or you sell a digital product, which that's a whole other different issue that I have a problem with, or whatever you plan to do. The thing is, if the United States is getting as bad as some of you guys say it's going to get, and your money is tied to the U.S. economy, what do you think is going to happen to your source of income? Like, a failed state does not have a functioning economy. So even if you're like me, you work for yourself, all my clients are based in the United States, except for one. So if shit really goes belly up like that, what do you think is going to happen to my ability to support myself? You work for a United States company, a U.S.-based company, and you work remotely, what do you think is going to happen if shit really hits the fan like that? And not even that. Let's say you saved up a bunch of money and you're living off of that. Fine. One of the reasons that so many of you are so happy to discuss your life of ease in other countries is because when you moved up a socioeconomic bracket that is based on a strong US dollar. In a failed state, or in a state that is failing, do you think our dollar will continue to perform that well? So what was $150,000 when you first got to Vietnam or Thailand is now reasonably only worth $60,000, maybe, or even worse than that. And a failed state cannot issue passports. One of the only reasons so many of us are so quick to get up and be able to move freely across other borders is because of a strong U.S. passport. If this becomes a failed state, an inoperable state, do you think that it's going to be the case any longer?
I think this TikTok, it's very strong in making a certain point, which is that, again, if you're premising your desire to move off of, the United States is collapsing. The economy is going to collapse. The United States is falling apart. This is a disaster. You're not going to be able to just escape that in a different country. For the reasons we outlined, for instance, the difficulty of actually moving, the uniqueness, the specificity of your situation. Because again, there's a reason the word maybe is in the title in this live stream and in this video. This is not saying nobody should ever move to Europe. If your individual situation says, I should go to Europe, then that's what it is. But if you're assuming that by going to Europe or any other Western state, you will escape fascism, you're not understanding the reality. And in this case, if it so happens that the US economy tanks, the AI bubble pops, the tariffs become too much of a problem for the United States, spending power declines to such a degree that even the Trump administration cannot fudge the numbers any longer, complete faith in the economy collapses, that dollar is going to collapse. And this beautiful life that you want to imagine for yourself in Paris is going to suddenly become a nightmare because your income and the place that you're also paying taxes to suddenly is a lot less. And also, that's not even to cover the old adage that when the United States sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. So if there's an economic collapse centered in the US, that's going to affect every market. You remember 2008, right? 1929 from your textbooks, right? So that's something you have to consider. And again, you've got an offer from a good university in Europe to study there, to get a student visa and stuff. Go for it. You've got an opportunity to work at a specific company. Go for it. I mean, a lot of the times in Europe, you're not going to get the position because there are a lot of countries in which the standard, and Europeans in the chat can speak to this, the standard is they will hire the people of that country first before they will hire a migrant worker. I think it's Germany wherein the statute is essentially you can't give the work to someone that can be done by a German. I don't remember if it's Germany or not. Might not leave this in the final take, but I've heard this about certain European states. And that speaks to also a larger difficulty taking from that. The US is ground zero for the destruction though. I just don't understand why you're clinging so hard to this idea. Like you are going to be sheltered or made any more safe by being in other countries wherein the same dynamics are taking place, wherein the economies are actually less powerful, quote unquote, than the United States, but also you're an immigrant there, but it's not going to affect you any worse. You're going to be more insulated. I just feel like you're speaking about these things like it's a video game, and you're not thinking about what it actually means to live in these scenarios. And this is if the collapse happens the way that folks who are trying to leave the United States say it's going to happen. And it's so funny because it's like this idea that it trails behind too, right? Or that it's not as bad in Europe because of these social safety nets. The social safety nets are already eroding. You think they're not going to completely dissipate these social safety nets that you won't qualify for in the first place? You think that they're just going to hold up when the dollar tanks? And all of a sudden, these parties that have been growing in popularity in these Western European countries especially, but sometimes in Eastern European countries, are not going to seize even more power off of the fact that the migration is increasing. Like, you think you're gonna be the guy who's gonna make it out on top. I'm amazed. Let's get into it a little bit more because I again, like, reacting to stuff in the chat, like, kind of gets me, like, ahead of myself. I was actually gonna show this later, but I want to get at this now. By the way, and this is a quick point based off of what Ivy says, right? Because I'm going to get in on another tangent, because why not? The terms immigrant, illegal immigrant, because when applied, everyone is illegal immigrants except other white Europeans that have the privilege to get called expats. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of tea that you don't think an ignorant American would know about. Even within these European countries, people that belong to this European ethnicity, let's say in Italy, you think that they're the same? You think that they actually believe that people from Verona are the same as people from Milan? You think that they don't even like each other, but they're gonna like you, an American? You're the first one on the list. All of these European nation states are the product of recent consolidation between different villages, townships, mini states, mini kingdoms, and even, you can say, indigenous groups into one combined country that through the combination then can consolidate power, centralize it, and command a certain area of land. You think the way that they talk about Sicilians, forget about it. Forget about Balkans, forget about it. Oh my goodness. That's not even talking about Jewish people. We're not even getting into whether or not you're Jewish. We're talking about white people. We're not even talking about white Jewish people. We're certainly not talking about poor people, because for poor people, this stuff is not an option at all. We're just talking about white Europeans from the same country. You think that those terms, you think people in Berlin and people in Bavaria, forget about it, man. Forget about it, bro. Bro, forget about it, bro. Yeah, Spanish. There's like 3 different countries in Spain. Do y'all hear me right now? Not only does Spain have multiple different like federal groups, states within the state. Of course, I'm talking about Catalonia. I'm talking about the Basque country. They even have different languages. And they've had longer than decades long movements in those regions for independence. But they're going to like the American. They're going to take care of the American. You're definitely going to fit in. And that's if you're white. Like, I feel like for folks who are not white, even for East Asian folks, right? Who I can be plenty critical of East Asian folks, which might be a shock to that one guy who was on my video about Europe, talking about, this guy never says anything about South Korea. I was literally a journalist who covered K-pop and culture in South Korea for a little while. Like, I know a couple of things about South Korean racism. Anything to deflect from talking about European racism, right? East Asians, this type of stuff is not a question. Like for East Asian folks, Chinese folks, Korean folks, Japanese folks, you already know what time it is if you find yourself surrounded by Europeans and all of a sudden everything collapses and there's already a rising far-right movement. You already know what time it is. Need I say anything about Desi people? Need I say anything about Arabic people, Amasik people, North Africans, South Africans, West Africans, East Africans? Need I say anything more about mestizas? Need I say anything more about indígenas? Indios? Need I say anything more about Black Latinos, Caribbeans? I don't need to say any Black Americans, Brown American. You got a U.S. passport, like, and you're gonna just be an immigrant surrounded by white people who you don't speak the language of. I'm just amazed. Like, you really think you're gonna move to Europe, where they're already, like, they're getting a taste of the kind of immigration and ethnic diversity that we have in the United States, and they're like, burn it all down. Burn every single healthcare system we have down. Destroy the hospital. All these countries that are like, pro-Israel. All these countries that are involved in colonialism. All these countries that are already eroding their own social safety nets, which said social safety nets have been in worsening condition all the time. Imagine, I'm gonna move to the... I'm sorry, bro. It just kills me. Imagine you're gonna move to the UK because you wanna get some universal healthcare. What is it called? The NHS? You imagine the UK healthcare system, the public healthcare system. It is absolutely important to the UK. Like, it is absolutely extremely valuable sector. It is also being held together with a small, like, not even a piece of floss, like an old, like, piece of dog hair. But you're gonna show up. I'm sorry, bro. I've never been this emotive in a live stream before. I try not to be this way. I try to be Mr. Composed because that's who I am. But it's it's just troubling to me that folks are literally sitting here having this conversation about fascism rising internationally, about Elon Musk, a guy who's not even American, just today, like, retweeting like white genocide myth stuff, right? We're talking about Trump. We're talking about fascism. And people are like, you know what though? That Swedish healthcare is going to save me. They don't even... You know what? Let's get into it. Okay, let's get back on track. These things that you're reaching for, they don't even work for some of the people in the country. Let's have a conversation specifically for folks who are not white. Let's say even if you get the work visa or the student visa to go to Sweden, and even if you overlook all the microaggressions and macroaggressions that we talked about in the last live stream about Europe and European culture, which many Europeans are so happy to admit exists, right? Or so happy to acknowledge as invalid and needing to be purged from society. Even if you get to integrate in there, even if you learn to speak a little Swedish, you go above and beyond for a country that generally speaks English, right? You will not get the same healthcare that white Swedish people do. This is a paper from 2019, Understanding Racism in Swedish Healthcare. Not a paper from 2025. 2019. Preliminary results indicate that patients from minority ethnic groups report that healthcare providers deem their symptoms as insignificant due to their ethnicity. Consequently, they experience a loss of integrity and trust in healthcare, often leading them to avoid seeking healthcare. Healthcare professionals conceptualize racism in varied ways, ranging from denying racism, normalizing and individualizing racism, to viewing racism as a structural problem. This is what's happening to Swedish immigrants right now. If you understand that these systems exist in the United States, where we've got all this money, like, yes, a destructive, an abhorrent healthcare system, but a healthcare system with a lot of money in it, where you can go to some very well-resourced private insurers with very qualified, very well-reviewed healthcare professionals. And you can understand that that system here, even if you go to a good place with a good doctor and pay good money, you will experience structural racism. You will experience denial based off of your race, your status. You will experience misunderstandings based off of such things. You think that the continuously thinning public healthcare system in Scandinavian countries is going to be any better? You know how people talk about like the education systems in these countries being better too, right? Yeah, how about that education system in Germany, right? How about that vaunted German education system? In the early 2000s, there was the OECD's Program for International Student Assessment Study, PISA, that shook up the education system and Germany's general belief in the meritocratic principle. People prior to this were very proud of the German education system. And then they found, through that study, which found that Germany performed poorly and that the educational success of students was closely linked to their socioeconomic background. The results also revealed that educational disparity between young people with and without a migration background, a term that has come under criticism because it lumps together people with very different connections to migration. And this is not an old study. Both the COVID-19 pandemic and recent increases in admission of young refugees into Germany, primarily from Syria in 2015 and Ukraine in 2022, have once again exposed and reinforced the already existing inadequacies and inequalities of the German school system. So how is Germany responding to this? What's going on in Germany as a response to this? Oh, the education minister says that there should be a quota limiting the number of immigrant children in Germany's schools, which has been met with both approval and criticism. 25 years after PISA, 25 years after the assessment shocked Germany that, oh my God, there's a disparity between white Germans and people of a migration background, including some white migrants, but also many black and brown migrants. This disparity is so high. Immigrant children in Germany do not receive the same level of education. 25 years later, hey, you know what? Maybe we should limit the amount of immigrant kids. Maybe that's the problem. Evan in Science says, BTW, people, research Danish ghetto laws. You will see how they treat people with migration backgrounds. This is stuff I'm not even up on. This is why I like talking to you guys, because you point stuff out. A lot of you are from Europe. A lot of you are not, but you will point stuff out that even I'm not even seeing, right? Danae is talking to somebody in Spanish right now. El punto es que asumir que basta con mudarse de Estados Unidos a un lugar mejor ignora que los problemas de Estados Unidos también existen o incluso se originaron en Europa. Y eso es importante. Eso es demasiado importante. No es solamente un caso de ser woke, un caso de ser preocupado con la historia y la teoría. Oh, la colonización sí era muy mal, pero pasó hace como 100, 200, 300 años. Es diferente ahora. Pero esa historia informa a lo que sucede. El presente es informado de la historia. Y es claro que en los países de Europa, que todo el mundo dicen son como áreas de refugio del fascismo en los Estados Unidos, están sufriendo por los mismos causas. Am I fucking up my tenses right now? My genders? Son los mismos problemas. Especialmente cuando uno está considerado un inmigrante. Porque no es solamente un caso de tener los papeles o no. Es lo que es considerado. If you're considered an immigrant, you could be like the black Scottish folks that we talked about in the last stream. Gauss is correct. Good. You could be a black Scottish person from a lot of descendancy, like many generations back even. You might not have ties to other countries that are realistic, and yet you're an immigrant. Gracias, Hayden. Zena says, I'm trans. Ain't no way I'm getting treated well as a migrant unless I have money, and I do not. LOL. This is a great point. At the end of the day, money talks, but you also what talks more than money is systems, right? And systems are not just driven by money. They're driven by order. They're driven by hierarchy. And depending on where you are in the hierarchy in a place, that will shape how you are affected by the system. It's so funny. Like, you know what? Move to Europe. Fine. Because a lot of you don't actually understand what it's like to be a minority. A lot of folks are white, like especially folks that are white, don't understand what it's like to be a minority, despite having been told many times, despite having posted the Black Lives Matter black squares. A lot of folks just don't understand how much their life has been shaped by the fact that they are at the top of a hierarchy. And so you know what? Go and get you that work visa. Go get that golden visa in that European country you keep hearing about. And as the economy continues to tank, and as those far-right populations continue to grow, go and see what it's like now that you are less protected in a country. You are less protected by a society. Go and see what it's like. Go and see what it's like. Also, if you want to move to the UK, says B, you will have to compete with the Australians. They're already stinking the place up. You genuinely won't be able to find a house. Stinking the place up is wild. Speaking a Latin-based language is a superpower because you can understand other Latin-based languages. Exactly. Listen, I'll understand some Italian, some Portuguese. Let them waste their time and resources in the immigration process. Exactly. You know what Brett said? What am I even doing this video for? What am I even doing this video for? I should just keep my mouth shut, because you know what? Let these folks do it. But in reality, I'm doing it more so for the folks that aren't quite as protected by the system, that are learning from these people who are protected by the system and their abhorrent, uneducated approaches to these discourses. This is why I'm talking about the video game mentality. It doesn't just affect those white people. It affects the black and brown people who maybe have a little bit of money and are really interested in fleeing fascism, leaving the United States for various reasons. And the only information that they can get access to are these conversations held by white people who don't understand what it's like to move anywhere, especially to move somewhere and be a minority. Do you think there's an option in moving to Latin America? Anything is an option, but like I said, it's a matter of your personal situation. If your personal situation brings you to where you're like, you know what, there's a visa that I can get in this Latin American country. I think that the country is beautiful. I think I can handle the culture. I think I can handle sticking out. Then you do it. I'm not saying stay in the U.S. Maybe I'm too late in the video to be saying this, but I'm not saying just stay in the U.S. It's going to be great. No, many of you are going to move, okay? But people that move because they've got something set up, resources. Which, by the way, community is a resource. You're going to move to another country as economic chaos ensues, and you're not going to have anybody there? You're going to be talking to all your friends on FaceTime because you don't have anybody there? Thank you, McSmoke Crack. Great name. I met 2 brown trans femmes yesterday, and that's like so uncommon. That's pretty tight. If I was American, I'd move to Mexico with the plan to become a Mexican citizen. You don't have to move far to go to a better place. It's your neighbor, that's the better place. There's some degree to which that can work, but the problem is that especially white people, but really Westerners in general, and people in general, even more so, have this idea like they're gonna go to the better place. But you don't just go to the better place. You build the better place. If you go to Mexico as an American, you had better get out there and help people. Same way you were going to help people in the United States if you had to stay here. And that's what these folks can sometimes be so afraid of. Maybe it's subconscious in a lot of cases. I think it is. Sometimes it's not so subconscious. A lot of these folks, what they're really afraid of is not that they're personally going to be repressed, because in a lot of cases, they're not the ones being targeted. What they're afraid of is having to help people. Having to spend considerable amounts of time in their day shifting the way that they work to help people, shifting the way that they live to help people. You don't get the better place. You become the better place. That's what Possible Bet just said, right? So whether you stay in the United States or you're going to a different country abroad, Europe, Latin America, Asia, Africa, you go there with the full intention. I'm going to build community here. I'm going to help people here. I'm not just going to take advantage of the systems that have already been established, because that's not really a realistic expectation anyway for someone like me. But what I'm going to do is help people. And I'm not going to just show up, and this is the reality also, to a country where a lot of people are getting exploited and just turn my head away and go, well, I'm benefiting because the cost of living is cheap for me. Because by the way, like we just said, right, earlier with that one TikTok that we watched by Just Right /Speaks, if that dollar collapses the way that a lot of you think it might, and if that economy collapses, and you have been the immigrant that showed up to this country, whether it's considered a poor one, maybe it's a middle class one, maybe it's even in Europe, a Western European high income country, I should say, the economy is doing bad, and your money doesn't mean what it used to mean, you know who people are really going to be mad at? Especially if they know what's really going on? They're going to be mad at you. Because you were the American that moved to their beautiful country to take advantage of the poor people there and to take advantage of a social system that you didn't help build. And now all of a sudden you don't have the money to just fly away. You don't have the ability to just fly away when all this shutdown happens that you think is going to happen. And all these people that have been complaining for decades, protesting for decades, organizing for decades against gringos in Mexico City, against ignorant Americans coming in on their golden visas in Spain and taking up the Airbnbs to take up the entire housing market and driving up the cost of bread, driving up the cost of local restaurants to meet the demands of Americans who are making all their money in the US and then bringing it where their dollar has more power. You're going to have a target on your back. Let's just say that. it's not gonna be nice for you. Like Evidence Science says, already people. I didn't catch where you're from, Evidence Science, but you said already people are angry at all the Russians moving here, which pushed the rents to insane prices. As a white person with money, you've been making a lot of money and a lot of hay taking advantage of these places. If you're feeling all confident now, having moved or being ready to move and take advantage of these places and their cost of living and their social systems, because you think because of Trump, America's going to go into this place where it's going to be a complete disaster, you're going to get deported. Like, people are going to come after you. Your life is going to be very miserable. And you know what? For a lot of you, that's what you deserved. It's funny because Maddie said that, like, who is this for, Elliot? You have like 3 trust fund fans. All your viewers are poor. All your viewers are broke. That might be the truth, but these folks have to hear it, and you guys need to know what to say to these folks. Possible Bat says, I'm from Barcelona and have been to anti-tourist protests that are basically anti-expat protests, and I haven't even talked about race as much as I could have because we went over that a lot. But the fact is, it's so depressing. But in 5 years, after all the damage that fascism has wreaked, the havoc it's wreaked on the U.S., if you are a black or brown person with a U.S. passport or some type of long-term residency status, the U.S. is probably still going to be the best place for you to be. I'm sorry to say it. It's not the case for everybody. Again, moving is about your personal situation. But sometimes that means your personal situation means like you got to stay here. I'm not some rich kid, okay? I make a working class salary. I make a working class income, I should say. I'm a small business owner is how I would report. I'm staying here, at least for the time being. If I see an opportunity that's great, like I've thought about going to Mexico plenty of times or going into other parts of Latin America. Like I've lived in Latin America before, but I'm probably going to stay in the US. Why? Because I got community here. I got things I can get involved in here. And there's a lot of places where reasonably, as things get worse, it might be even harder for me because of my ethnic background, my migration status, etc. Isn't that dark, Head Turner? It's dark. Lots of Americans moving to Portugal. Like, that's a thing. It's like Stephen Wings. I mean, it's a common romantic conversation. Just move somewhere that's safer. It's so easy to imagine without the realism. But that romanticism we have to unpack, because it's a romanticism that has been based in exploitation. It's a romanticism that has shielded us from understanding how things happen. We didn't just get social systems that currently exist in the United States. They didn't just show up. They happened through strong organizing, through labor strikes. They happened through socialist organizing, communist organizing. That's how we got Social Security, right? As a compromise from the capitalist class to keep capitalism alive. Same thing in Europe. Long history of workers working together to ensure some type of bolstering of these social safety nets. Everything happens through struggle. And what's happened with the internet and the past couple of decades of on and off economic flourishing, quote unquote, under the neoliberal capitalist system, is that people don't see the struggle as much because you don't have to. You insulate yourself with pretty YouTube videos. You insulate yourself with the nice cafes. You insulate yourself and you don't realize how many people are suffering, how much worse it's getting, and the fact that that struggle has never stopped. The worst thing that you can do mentally is think to yourself that the struggle is over. I can't speak for how people will be living in 1,000 years, but I don't see it. I don't see that struggle ending within the next 100. Thanks, Ivy. Yeah, the 8-hour workday was hard fought. I had this paper here about racial inequality and discrimination in European labor markets. I had that there for you. I had this really good Wanderslut take, sorry, that's her name, on TikTok, about gentrification in Europe. Let's just touch on this really quickly because, yeah, just to hammer home how American migrants with money going to Europe are seeing things right now. The other side of it.
The Save Europe crowd are so blinded by hatred and racism that they can't even see that it's not asylum seekers and immigrants who are ruining their countries and contributing to their inability to survive in their own cities, but rather people from wealthy countries like America who are moving to their countries and contributing to the unsustainable cost of living. We have seen the direct correlation between digital nomad visas, golden visas as well, and the effect that it has had overwhelmingly on people who live in Italy, Spain, Greece, Portugal, and other countries around Europe. Because if we're talking about facts, asylum seekers and refugees actually make up a very meager percentage of most European countries. But we have seen a direct correlation between the accessibility of digital nomad visas and other visas that typically appeal and are only accessible to wealthy people, with the higher cost of living in multiple European cities.
So again, going over that simple reality. Again, if you have this mystical romantic idea in your mind that you're going to get that digital nomad visa and escape fascism, not only are you not going to escape fascism, but whatever progressive movements that are occurring, you're not going to escape them too. Most of Europe already hates British expats. They hate American ones even more. Okay, here's a point that I'm going to make, and I'm going to kind of conclude for this last segment. This is why so many people, primarily white people in America, like in the US and Europe, Western Europe, just don't get it. They don't get that what they're talking about when it comes to politics and when it comes to the economy is not just facts on a fact sheet. It's not just charts. It's not just a couple of quotes from a book or a CNN interview. This is lived reality for people. And so when you see these progressive movements, when you see something like the Black Lives Matter movement or the pro-Palestine movement, when you see, ICE and the Abolish ICE movement in the United States, so many people are still trained to think of this as, oh man, those poor people, right? If they're sympathetic at all to the marginalized communities being affected, they come at it from this very patriarchal standpoint, this very pastoral standpoint. Those poor people, they need help. They need my help. I gotta do something. I gotta be the voice, right? And I'll take it in a lot of cases. But this has been the problem the whole time. You don't get that this is affecting everybody and it will affect you. And it does affect you already, and you're not noticing it. You're not noticing that the struggle is happening. That didn't stop you from struggling. It made you worse at it. This is what we mean when we talk about solidarity. These checks that you get, these $5,000, $10,000 checks that you get from the shadiest of sponsors to promote gambling or to promote BetterHelp. That money is going to look funny when the dollar declines. That money is not going to hold you down when this fascism increases. And I'm not anti getting paid. Like, everybody has to do work. Everybody has to live under capitalism. But these things are not going to protect you. And that's why it's important that you protect other people. That's why it's important that you work with other people to help protect them. Don't run away. Don't look for a nice peaceful place where nobody can bother you. Look to figure out what you can do to help people, because you're protecting yourself that way. This is why it's really important, because now you're in a position where you're saying to yourself these unrealistic scenarios of what you should do. For folks that are legitimately going to move abroad to Australia, where they just had this massive rally on August 31st that was anti-immigration. Somebody in the chat said, like, I'm going to study there. It's like, be prepared, because if you have an opportunity to go there, the struggle is not over. It takes a different shape that you have to be prepared for. It takes a different shape. So it's not an anti-moving stance for me. It's not a, oh, you should stay in the US stance. It's a stop avoiding the struggle. Paternalistic, yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Only solidarity can protect you, other people working together, protecting each other. Exactly what Charlie just said. Yeah, the dollar has been weaker than the euro. Mixed smoke crack. Elliot, I am an upper middle class, quote unquote, white person, and I've been trying to tell my parents that investment/stock money means nothing and they're like relying on it for their future. Bro, that's not real. But that's the thing. I saw a lot of people responding, yo, like the economy's gonna get bad. Put your money in stocks. Do folks not remember 2008? Like, yes, investments, holding your money in the market, there's some amount of your portfolio that should be dedicated to that. Savings accounts, there's some amount of your income that should be dedicated to that, realistically, for most people's financial lives. But like, the idea that you're just gonna, invest your way through the economy failing or invest your way through any type of turmoil, it doesn't make sense. You can't eat money. You can't live inside of money. You can't protect yourself with money. Like, you can only do so much to protect yourself with money, I should say. And a lot of the times that stuff is not going to be enough. US dollar off to the worst start in the year for over 50 years. Just use Bitcoin, bro. What do you do if it gets deleted out of nowhere? No, you don't understand. You don't understand, @sign. It's decentralized. You have an @sign, right? No, that's just like a cool circle thing. Yeah, Bitcoin. Oh, it's decentralized. So like everybody has it. You know what I mean? So it can't just get removed out of nowhere. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Mixed smoke crack. I just keep saying it because it's nice to say. This is why we have to tell you the importance of fascism, right? The importance of noticing it. I really like Neo Ola on TikTok.
Look to Europe. I tell y'all that every time we talk about the state of politics. Look to Europe. Y'all have to be way more proficient in other countries' political systems. Last year in my newsletter, I covered the growing support amongst the youth and general population in Germany for the ADF. And I covered Meloni in Italy being a Mussolini fangirl. In the past, I covered how Sweden is promoting some of the most concerning immigration policy and ability to revoke citizenship related to criminality. But that be our European meccas though. Have you paid attention at all to the UK? The Netherlands, that Dutch election was real spooky for the left. Students are trying to overturn their government in Serbia right now for very similar concerns. I just need us to be so for real. This colonial hell state's grandparents are wildin' right now. Like father, like son, like mother, like daughter. One of the many reasons I keep telling y'all you cannot outrun the empire. They already brought it to everybody's doorstep. You cannot insulate yourself, only concerning yourself with American politics. They are greatly informed by each other. They're in cahoots.
Put so perfectly. Serbia mentioned. Yeah. MC Smoke Crack? Yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking it might be that as well. Everybody read the history books and said, let's do it again. I'm saying. But you know, at the end of the day, the desire to distinguish yourself as better from other people, better than other people, I should say, and to stand out and to associate yourself with a type of excellence and a type of regality triumphs people's ability to understand how to survive, to understand community, to understand how to actually live when things are hard. I think I've said all that I needed to say. But in conclusion, the last thing I will say is to repeat, if you're going to move somewhere, know what you're doing. Let it be because the situation lends itself to something that will work for your situation. Let it be because you know that you'll have people and resources there. Let it be because you know how you'll operate when laws continuously being hostile to migrants affect you. How you'll operate when you're going to be a minority. How you'll operate when you're lower on the hierarchy. If you're just sitting here and thinking that you're going to move somewhere to escape a global crisis, excuse me, that's what I have to think. I burped. That's all I have to think.